you're right. We don't want to read books about people that are happy. Nobody wants to read books about people that are happy and living wonderful lives, because all it does is make you envious about the parts of your life that are not good. But you're not envious of anything when you read 1984. You close that book and you're like, oh, thank God my life doesn't look like that.
Hey readers and writers, welcome to episode 14 of season 2. Today we're talking to writer Jessica Reilly about dystopian fiction. Jessica is a copywriter, a content strategist, and cannabis aficionado. She combines her passion for cannabis with her talent for writing at Jessica Reilly Writer and runs the Cannabis Creative blog. So hi Jessica, how are you?
Hi Deb, I'm doing well. How are you?
Pretty good. It is a beautiful autumn day outside and I'm so happy the rain's finally stopped.
Oh, same boat. It rained all weekend here and we finally have a glimpse of blue skies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so nice outside. Like it's chilly as hell, but it looks nice.
Yes, so the leaves are finally changing. It actually feels like fall now. It's only November 1st.
True. Now that it's actually November, it's finally fall. I finally, the rain knocked down enough leaves that we actually going to have to do some leaf raking, which is less than pleasant, but it's nice to look at right now, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. Give us some normalcy of fall and not 80-degree days, wondering what's going on.
So why don't you go ahead and tell the listeners a bit about yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Jessica Reilly. I am based in upstate New York, and I am a freelance writer who specializes in the cannabis industry. I became a writer probably because I've loved books all my life. I've always loved to read. I've always been the bookworm in the corner reading for hours on end while everybody's playing elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. I think you're speaking to the entire podcast community at this point, or at least I love that. my listenership.
My people.
Right. Yeah, we are all the geeks in the corner reading the books and not doing something else. In fact, so much, I remember skipping class. Like I was such a rebel when I was 14. I remember skipping class in my middle school. It was like, I don't know, history or something. And I would go to the library and go to the back stacks and read books. Like just what, oh my God, what was I doing? But that is what I used to do. And I had terrible marks in that class.
Well, I totally feel for that. I was on vacation in September of this year. We were on the beach and my partner and all of his friends were off boogie boarding in the waves and they were like, come join us. And I was like, I am not done with this book.
That's awesome. What book was it?
I think at that point I was reading The Pot Apocalypse. Is an industry book talking about the growth and eventual deflation of the cannabis industry.
Okay.
So it was riveting.
It sounds riveting. If you're anything like me, like I go through so many books that some days I go through so many books. I'll go weeks without cracking one. And then 1 week I'll read 4 at a time. And then you have trouble remembering which one you were reading at that point.
Yes, I only started tracking the books that I read last year. So this year I set a very ambitious goal for myself to read 100 books to kind of kick my own butt and get back on track because I was going months without reading anything. Mm-hmm. And it's just not okay when all I'm doing is scrolling through TikTok and Netflix.
No, that's not okay at that point. It's okay if you're like doing work.
Yes.
That's what most of my evenings now are spent. I'm finally drafting my second novel. So like I'm writing in the morning, I'm working on the podcast during the day. And then at night I'm work writing. So I was like, I don't have that nice little read time anymore. It's kind of disappeared at the moment.
Just for the time being. It's cyclical.
It is. Yeah. In a couple of months, I'll read another 6 books in 1 week and it'll even itself out.
Exactly. Your brain will feel satiated then.
Right. So let's talk about dystopian literature. Fiction? Yeah. I don't know which way I like. I think maybe fiction. I don't know. Some things sound better when you say literature. Some things sound better when you say fiction. And that sounds really dumb saying it out loud now that I've actually said it for prosperity's sake. But I'm going to start calling it dystopian fiction. So what do you like about it?
Oh gosh, it has captivated my imagination for as long as I can remember. If we look at the sci-fi fantasy divide, I've always been very much on the sci-fi side of that. I love technology, robots, space travel, not so much into dragons. And I think
not all fantasy has dragons.
This is true. That's why I love Harry Potter, but there are exceptions to every rule.
So do you remember what the first dystopian one you read was?
Oh, that is such a good question. The first one I tried to get into was called, it's the Pretties trilogy by Scott Westerfield, and it starts with
Okay.
the Uglies.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of faltered on that when I first started to get into it because there's a lot of technology in that book. It's a future
Mm-hmm.
where all the humans are genetically enhanced, so everybody's very pretty.
Mm-hmm.
And he loves his technology. So he goes into how the hovercrafts are running. And I was just like, I don't care about any of that. And then I came across, I think it was his fourth book. It's a trilogy, but he actually published four books.
Mm-hmm.
And I got so into the fourth one that I was like, all right, now I got to go back to the first one and like actually figure out where this story is going.
So did you start to read the first one, stop, read the fourth one, and then start all over again? Or did you actually try to meander your way through all three before you got to four?
Oh, I only got like halfway through the first one before I gave up and was like, this is too complicated. And by the time I got to the fourth one, the storyline was so interesting that I was like, well, I can just skip all the words that I don't care about.
That's one way to go about it.
Yep, just keeps me interested if I'm not worrying about how the engines are running.
Mm-hmm. So tell me about, not, this isn't like just a plug for the book, but I haven't read that one. So can you give me a little bit more on the plot line of like, how is it dystopian? What makes it dystopia?
Yeah, so it's one of those series that the first book you opened and it's got one of those first lines that kind of punches you in the face.
Okay.
I might be paraphrasing, but it's like the sky was cat vomit pink. And you're like, oh, okay.
Okay.
And then it goes into like the exact shade of what cat vomit and what the cat ate. It's very interesting, but in the world, once you're 16, you're considered an adult and you're allowed to move to a special part of the city. And once you move there, you get this essentially genetic reconstruction surgery where they take your body and however you look, and they just make you very, very conventionally beautiful. Okay. And then all of the adults, 16 to like mid 20s, the book's kind of vague on the age, live in this like wonderful downtown euphoric life where they don't have to work. They just party all the time. Everybody gets drunk and does drugs and has sex.
This does not sound like my type of place. Where's the library?
Right. But in the start of the book, the protagonist, who's 15, she's just too young. She makes a new friend and the friend says, I'm not doing this when I turn 16, and runs off. And the book kind of kicks off because the government's like, you can't leave. So they send the protagonist after her in the wild to like befriend her and take her back.
Okay.
So the subsequent 3 books after actually follow both of these women as they kind of progress from 16 through adulthood while dealing with this oppressive regime in their city.
Okay. All right. So I'm thinking it takes. I was doing some research on dystopian novels before this. I mean, not that I haven't read my fair share, but I'd never really explored it. I don't know. Almost want to say academically before this podcast. I hadn't really like deep dive into the origins of it. So I'm thinking I don't know, it's hitting a lot of notches there. Definitely. It's got that base of, it sounds like controlling regime type government kind of controls your views, and I don't know, maybe loss of their individualism because they're making them all, I don't know, I doubt they're making them all exactly the same, or else they'll be twins everywhere. Yeah. But just all conventionally, like no uniqueness to anybody's face anymore.
Yeah, there's a lot of, there's man versus technology because you're dealing with all of this like hyper specialized technology.
We were just talking about the hovercraft. So yes, technology is in there too.
And the facial reconstruction surgery. And then they get into how they're using all these surgeries to like create super soldiers and how you can actually, replace people's bones and their ligaments and everything. But you also have a lot of, it's not man versus self because it's a woman, but man versus self because this woman, as she goes through this journey, she's very conflicted. This girl was her friend. Is she doing the right thing? How dare this woman take her away from the surgery she deserves? So you get to watch this unfolding morality. And what I really liked at the time that I read it, I was probably like 15 or 16, was the protagonists were 2 women and they were really pitted against each other, not in a way that like I saw in the media, which is like cat fights, but by the government for their control of their futures.
Okay, that is interesting. What year did it come out? Do you know?
Oh, it came out mid 2000s. I want to say sometime between 2005 and 2007. The first one came out.
Okay, all right. I'm just getting a time frame. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the last one was like 2012. Couldn't have been 2012, like 2011, something like that.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And so I'm mentally doing math and my brain shuts down when I'm trying to add numbers together because my brain is built more around words. So it's hard even doing simple math sometimes.
Absolutely.
So, what other types of dystopian fiction have you read? Are you generally stick to the YA? Because given that the protagonist is 15, I'm assuming it's a YA version of dystopia. Or do you branch out more on the heavy science fiction dystopia? Like, are we talking like 1984, Blade Runner stuff?
Yeah. So when I first started, it was definitely in the YA genre, just because that's who I was at the time. And a lot of the dystopian YA novels were narrated by women and marketed for women.
That was a big movement. I think it's still even going on. It's a big YA movement. I mean, obviously, I won't say obviously, but it feels like most of those are female protagonist voice. Maybe that's where the readership is, and that's why it's so heavily in that direction. Yeah, I definitely have noticed that it's still like I don't know, that the YA dystopians thing is still a thing.
Yeah, and I love that. Like I love Hunger Game. It's one of my absolute favorite books, and I love to have heated discussions with anybody who wants to write it off as just a YA girls book. I think a lot of the reason the modern dystopian novels with female protagonists are marketed as YA books is because that's who the agents think will read them, is teen girls.
Right.
Kind of writing off the interest of the general readership, particularly men, in women-driven stories. But I have read a lot of the classic dystopian novels. When I was in high school, I wasn't in advanced English, so I used to steal my friends' copies of Brave New World in 1984 and read them at lunch.
Nice.
And I love 1984. I think it is just such a stellar example of everything that a dystopian novel could be, because Orwell just takes it and he gives you everything you could ever possibly want to know about that world. That man spares absolutely no detail. And I love that.
No, not at all. Sometimes I have problems with novels like that just, it overloads you with, like, I don't know, I want to just call it exposition, but it's not quite exposition. It's just detail, I guess. But my brain has trouble with that because then I lose track of where the story is actually at. Like,
you mean in the sections where he like goes into the history textbook about the world?
Yeah. Then you forget what this plot is supposed to be doing almost.
Yes.
One of the things I find interesting, especially talking older dystopian novels, is it feels like they almost, I don't know, it's like the people who read them didn't learn any lessons, and then the world kind of goes in that exact same direction that they predicted. They're saying, hey, don't go here because it's so bad. That's why I'm writing a novel about it. And then the world just like, yeah, let's just do that. World War II, here we go. Yeah,
something as I've learned as I've been diving into this more is the science fiction genre was really not appreciated in the mid 20th century during, Orwell's time, Ray Bradbury, a lot of Margaret Atwood's stuff. It really wasn't seen as this respectable genre. It was kind of seen as this like fluff kids stuff. So I think
I don't understand that. I'm a fan. I love science fiction, especially you mentioned Margaret Atwood. I mean, the readers know I have a compulsion to buy whatever used copy of Handmaid's Tale presents itself to me. I just have to own it. I don't know why, but it's a great story. But I know, but it's so expertly told. I'm actually considering doing a master class subscription just because I found out she does a class on it.
I've seen those ads.
Have you? I only just found it when I was doing research actually for this podcast. And I'm like, ooh, should I do it for like a month and then just watch her stuff? I'm obsessed with this woman. She's so good.
Yeah. And I think that general disregard of not being serious storytelling, kind of being for kids and aliens and people who don't take things seriously, allowed the readership to just go, this will never happen, and just carry on their merry ways, taking absolutely no lesson from these stories whatsoever.
Which is interesting because dystopian obviously is the parallel to utopian, which utopian actually on its own, if you think about it, is actually dystopian as well, because that very first Utopia, was it 15 something or other?
15.
Was actually, yeah, it was kind of like an allegory saying that this place can never exist. So that original book in itself was actually probably like the first dystopian novel.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting that I don't know where I was going with that. I lost it. Just gone.
It's people want these perfect worlds. And I think it's really interesting how humans say, okay, you have this idea for a perfect world, but obviously humans are inherently fallible. So how could we screw this up? And then they just kind of run with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the things I like, especially about a well-crafted dystopian story, is that it leads you in and it actually makes you want to be part of that world until you see like the seedy underbelly. You're like, oh, wow, this is great. Why aren't we doing this? And then as you get more into the story, then it's like peeling back layers of an onion and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And then eventually you realize, oh, that's what the author was trying to say.
Yes.
Is that this was a bad decision.
Yeah, that's what I think that's what captivated me about Pretties once I got into it, is you read it and you're like, oh, once you turn 16, everything physically that you hate about yourself is changed. Nobody can make fun of you. Everybody gets along because everybody's beautiful. And then you dive in the book and you're like, oh, well, you're unconscious and they're operating on you. What are they actually doing?
Yeah, I think that's very seductive, especially maybe that is why it's such a big topic in YA with a female protagonist, because of that. Like, it is so susceptible because, everything is thrown at young girls. Like, I don't know, there's the Instagram thing lately. Like,
oh my God, seriously, yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's, you can draw very similar lines to it, that young girls are told that they're not good enough. So then you throw a story at them that shows that, oh, you could be better just by magically turning 16. And I can see where someone would be like, yes, let's do that. And not even think about the consequences, not even think later on, because everything is thrown at them, telling them that they are not worthy.
Yeah, it's like an outlet almost. You can't go and burn down the government. You can't do what Katniss does in Hunger Games and stage a revolution, but it makes you feel better knowing that other people are thinking about it, that other people are telling them these stories of empowerment too. And it's not just you going, this feels wrong.
And then I don't know. And then you have other dystopian novels like, and I'm going to offend a lot of people by saying this, but you have The Road by Cormac McCarthy.
Oh my God.
I am not a fan. I've tried to read it. I cannot get through it. I don't know what it's about it. I just don't like it. I mean, it's one of my husband's favorite books. People love this book. I want to. I understand the concept. I like the concept, but I just cannot get into this particular book. But there's that style of dystopian novels where humans have killed the planet, and there's then these renegades trying to survive, and we get Mad Max style stuff. And
The Road is just dreary. I read it a couple summers ago while I was on vacation, and I was like, well, this isn't super long. I can just power through this. But it's just page after page of misery and desolation and struggle. And there's no resolve when you get to the end. You look at a book like Fahrenheit 451, which still ends tragically, but it ends with hope. And you get to the end of the road.
There's a resolution to it. The road is just meandering stream of consciousness about how awful life is or has gotten.
Yeah, it's like if somebody took Jack Kerouac's book, what is the van tripping? It's not The Road, but now The Road is stuck in my head.
I don't know if I know which one you're talking about.
Oh my goodness, this is going to drive me nuts. It's like a seminal 1950s book for a young man about this man who leaves New York City and like road trips around the country with his best friend with like $5 in his pocket.
Okay. I'll look it up and put it in the show notes.
But it's like if you took that and pumped it through a dystopian lens. It's just a stream of consciousness, misery type deal where you can't even think to help yourself.
And then you have other ones like on the technological end, like I mentioned before, like Blade Runner, like why do android dream of electronic sheep, or do they dream of electronic? I think it's do they dream of electronic sheep? Like, I don't even think I realized that one was supposed to be dystopian. It just seemed like, because sometimes that line blurs, between science fiction and dystopian, they kind of go hand in hand a lot. They sometimes just don't, like, I didn't think about it. I just thought that as science fiction. And then I was reading, I was doing my research, and I'm just like, I guess that is dystopian. I never thought of it that way, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, some of them can really just seem very innocuous. There's a really, really old dystopian novel. It's called We, and it was originally published in Russian. So any versions that you read are Russian translations.
Okay.
And it's this world based in Russia that's just based in math and science, and everything is like nailed down to its mathematical perfection. Everybody like gets up at the same time, moves at the same time, eats at the same time. Like everybody moves through this world together in synchronicity. And until you get to the end, you don't even realize really what is dystopian about it until you're like, oh, they're doing lobotomies on people.
I've never read that. It has reminded me though of Flatland for some reason, but yeah.
Yeah, some of them just are, you're like, something's off about this world, but it's like, you know, not too bad.
Right, it's just science fiction. Just you're going with it because it's science, sci-fi. So now that you've read a lot, what's your favorite one that you've read?
It would probably be
if you can narrow it down, or maybe a subgenre of dystopian. Can you point it to a subgenre, a type?
Yeah, I think I have two favorites. One is 1984 because it is just such a seminal dystopian work, and it was the first one that I really got into on the first read of my own volition. I was sucked into this like dirty, grimy, depressing world, and it just, you're like, oh, it's getting better, and then it gets so much worse.
Yeah.
And then I think my other favorite would be the Hunger Games trilogy, because I think that Suzanne Collins she so beautifully and simplistically paints this tragic world that's like 3 steps left of where we are now. And I read of Songbirds and Snakes, which came out earlier last year. It was
I haven't had a chance to read that one. It's sitting on like the table behind me, but I haven't had a chance to read it.
It's so good. She does a really good job of continuing to blend all of the elements of the story she created with this precursor world, so that you're really able to still sympathize for the characters in the book while remembering who they become in her end works. And you're able to just see this beautifully painted picture that she doesn't need fancy words. She doesn't need history textbooks within the book to explain to you. And it's something that even if you are not a 15-year-old girl living in rural Pennsylvania, you can relate to.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to have to put that on my list of, I don't know, many books to finish.
The never-ending list.
Yeah. It's like I go and I pick it up. It's like, yes, I need to own this book because I need to read it. And then it just goes in the pile of things you need to read. And then just, it feels like that pile is never finished. You just kept adding new things on top of it.
I have several of those.
Several stacks of those.
Whenever somebody's like, oh, you should read this, I'm like, oh, I'll put it on my list, which means I'll get to it in like a year.
If you're lucky, then.
Yeah, right. If I remember when I'm walking into the library next week, but probably not.
I was thinking about movies, about dystopian movies. And I don't know, the one that keeps coming to mind is WALL-E for some reason. Maybe because my kids like it. Yeah. Like, I don't know if it's a lot, it doesn't have the totalitarian, I guess it does have a little bit of totalitarian government with the ship AI, but it definitely has the environmental aspect and the lack of individualism, like the loss of just kind of mentally running through things that I have read and watched. That's a very broad, like, I don't think I ever really realized how many stories touch on dystopian, like at least in some way. Like, it doesn't have to be the major theme. It doesn't have to be like the allegory of something that's wrong today. But if you like, especially like we were just saying, like, especially a lot of sci-fi, like I see there's always a little bit of it woven into it because I don't know, maybe that's just what makes a story interesting.
Yeah, I've been reading a lot of Isaac Asimov's short stories this year, just because I've been trying to pick up my pace a little bit. And he does a lot of sci-fi, and it's not usually dystopian, but he'll like sprinkle in bits of it every now and then, you know, be in space and your AI gains sentience, or you're on Mercury and your robot is going rogue, or there's a mysterious tapping at your porthole window and you don't know why. So he sprinkles it in well without making the story overtly dark or like too into that.
Well, I think it also speaks to the fact that just, you know, a story is not a good story unless it has some kind of suffering in it.
Yes.
I mean, it has to have that element that you're struggling against something. And I think at least the element of dystopianness, I don't like to keep saying dystopian. It feels like I'm just saying a made up word over and over again. Like, and then, one time I wrote the word tree, or I looked at the word tree so often, I forgot the way it was spelled. Like, I'm like, no, there's no way it's TREE. That's wrong. Eventually it just starts to feel like a made up word. But anyways, it feels like, I don't know where I'm going with this. I keep losing my train of thought. What's wrong with me this afternoon?
Well, I think you're right. We don't want to read books about people that are happy.
Yes.
Nobody wants to read books about people that are happy and living wonderful lives, because all it does is make you envious about the parts of your life that are not good. But you're not envious of anything when you read 1984. You close that book and you're like, oh, thank God my life doesn't look like that.
That's true. And thank you for reminding me what I was trying to say. It's like my brain gets lost sometimes. I forgot what the start of the sentence was supposed to be. But yeah, a story isn't a good story unless you have something to fight against, something to overcome. And I think dystopia, I am getting caught on the same word again, is convenient, especially in a science fiction story, because it just lends itself naturally, because it's almost always something in the future, is reflecting on the current state. So I think it just lends itself naturally to science fiction, because I don't think I've ever read a science fiction that wasn't set in the future. I wonder if that's actually part of the rules. I'm
trying to think, because all of them, from the vantage point of the narrator or from the story, are in the future of where the story started. Even though 1984, obviously years in the past now, it was in the future when he wrote it, though. It was like 30 years in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think... I remember, I watched the clip of Margaret Atwood talking about dystopian novels, and she brought up the fact that, at least in all of her work, it's always she takes something today that might seem innocuous or something that's headed in a direction, like let's use the Instagram example, and then you set it in the near or far future and then take it to the extreme, show how a couple of choices could have severe consequences. So I think maybe being in the future might be part of the requirements for a dystopian novel.
That would make sense, that you have to follow the timeline and see how it plays out with these choices that have not yet in our time come to fruition.
I mean, I suppose you could do like an alternate Earth reality thing, but that would still just make it feel in the future if it's different than had a different starting point.
Yeah, like Fahrenheit 451 doesn't give you an exact date, but in it they talk about the past when we read books, and you're like, oh, that's my time. So this is in the future.
Yeah. And then who was that? That was George Orwell, correct?
Fahrenheit 451, Ray Bradbury.
Bradbury. Okay. 1984 is George Orwell.
Yes.
I don't know why I get those two guys confused.
Because they wrote the books of 2 years apart. I was reflecting on that the other day, because they're two very different books written by two very different men, but they were only published 2 years apart, and they just show such different versions of the future. Imagined around that 1949, 1950 timeline, right? During the Cold War, after both World Wars. And Orwell was not an American, he was a European. So he took a post-war totalitarian view, whereas Bradbury was an American. So he took a capitalism to the extreme point of view when looking at the future.
Right. And then who was it? Orson Welles then took that capitalism and broke it down in The Time Machine. As I'm following the thread of capitalism for some reason.
Well, it's interesting, because I don't think you see a ton of, and maybe we're just not at the point where we're writing about it yet, but you see a lot of dystopian novels about totalitarian regimes. You look at Animal Farm, and it's the most basic breakdown of fascism ever. But you don't see a ton of dystopian novels really taking capitalism to its most extreme and viewing it from a dystopian lens. But maybe it's just too close to home right now.
Maybe, although I feel like I've read something something similar along those lines. And I was kind of making a joke with The Time Machine, but that was his goal, was to show how capitalism was failing, and then a new version of it. And how that one was also awful. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm not sure what his point of that whole book was, other than the fact about time streams. I feel like I've read a capitalism story that I might just be confusing it with a video game. I think I might just be confusing it with one like the Anno 2777s or something like that.
Yeah, they are not afraid to tackle a dystopian view of capitalism, but then you get to play it from a first person perspective, and you get to walk through it. So that's fun in a different way.
Well, I'm glad you just got my reference about Anno though. So yay to you. Congratulations. Usually I say that and people are just like, I have no idea what you're talking about. It's like this great city builder. And it takes in the future and then in the past. And yeah. Okay. But yes, I think I might be confusing a book with actually a video game storyline.
It can get intricate. I mean, some of those are really nice. My partner will play it. I'm like, wait, stop. I want to read these prompts. Like, they're world building. And he's like, screw these. Like, I want to get to the gameplay. Like, I want to know the storyline.
I think my favorite dystopian, probably The Handmaid's Tale. I'm thinking I've already mentioned it, but I do think that's probably the one I enjoyed the most. It was, I don't think it was the first one I read. I can't remember what the first one I read was now. It might have been like Animal Farm or something.
I mean,
what's that?
The Handmaid's Tale stays with you. I think after I read that book, that was the most a dystopian novel has disturbed me. Like 1984, walked away from no problem. Closed the Handmaid's book, and I was like, this is not sleeping in my room tonight.
Well, it might also have something to do with the fact that the Handmaid's Tale had a female protagonist, and it would hit like so close to home, probably. Because I have read it at different points in my life and felt different things about it. I mean, I always end up hating the society, but I felt different things about her history, and then her reactions to things. Like, I think I first probably read it when I was probably a teenager, 17-ish, maybe, I think pre-college. And then I had a different reaction when I was older. And then I had a completely different reaction after I already had kids of my own.
Oh, okay.
Like, it just spoke on different levels at different times in my life. It's like, like you can listen to a song, and that song, depending on how you feel, will either make you feel happy or sad. Like, does that make sense at all?
No, absolutely. And I think it speaks volumes to Margaret Atwood's storytelling ability that, this is a book that resonates deeply with all women, but depending on where you are in your life, it's going to scare you for a bunch of different reasons.
Yes. Because the ending is pretty much always awful. Like, you never know what happens. And I actually did you watch the show at all?
I haven't. Well, firstly, because when it comes to media I consume, I have a pretty hard and fast rule that I don't consume gratuitous sexual assaults. And obviously in The Handmaid's Tale, there is a lot of it.
I know what the story is built around.
Yes, exactly. It's something to read about it. It's another thing to watch it. And I also have heard they have not stuck horrifically to the storyline of the books, especially now that they're in their fourth season. Is it worth it?
Well, I have not watched all four seasons. I've watched the first season. And the first season was, yes, that the storyline is built around sexual assault, basically. Like, they're just basically pretty much raped against their will all the time. That's their job. But the first season was pretty good. It wasn't very graphic. It didn't show you everything that was going on. And it stuck pretty decently to the book. Like, it did take some liberties here and there, but enough that it felt like it was within the same world. But I can't speak as to season 2, 3, and 4 because I haven't watched them. I was kind of hoping you had and could tell me about it.
It's one of those shows that I'm like, I like the book. Maybe I should watch it. But I also just, if I'm consuming TV media, I want it to be like positive and happy and uplifting, because I like dystopian
I can
books.
Get behind that.
I like to read the sad news. I don't like to watch it.
Yeah. Well, actually, I'm not saying I'm the opposite, because I also don't like to watch sad stuff, but I have kind of this kind of hard rule for myself that I don't read anything that I don't like, which sounds very basic when I say it out loud. But I don't read anything that in the first couple of pages, I can't get behind a character or an idea and root for them. Like, I don't want to have to suffer through a story like The Road. I'm sorry, Cormac McCarthy. I doubt you're listening to this, but if you are, you are a phenomenal writer, but I just could not get behind the stream of consciousness.
Yeah.
And just the fact that it was just like, nothing happened, nothing positive happened. I was talking to somebody else, and I talk about this all the time to my husband, that I cannot watch a show if there isn't a single redeeming character in it.
Yes. Like,
I'm the person, I need that someone to get behind, to root for.
Yes. Like we need suffering in the media and content we consume, but it needs to be appropriate. You need to still be able to make us laugh and give us hope and make us feel something that isn't like, oh my God.
Right. You need the balance of awfulness, but hope and goodness on the other side. Like I can't consume a media, book or TV or whatever if it doesn't have that, at least that grain of hope in there.
Yeah, and the road does not. The road
100%
the horse until it's dead. It's like nope.
Yep. I mean, that's one thing. I had a hard time with the Hunger Games. I read them so much later, like after everybody else, after the movies. It's just, I was older by the time they were out, and I just like this. I don't feel like this is going to fit for me. Like I'm not 15. Like, you know, I had a hard time. Like, I just didn't think I was right for it. But then after I saw the movies, I was like, fine, I'll read them. And crazily enough, my husband owned them and was trying to get me to read them. So, I finally broke down. I took the copies out, and it took me a while to get into it. Like, I think I had that bias against that younger YA character. But then I started to like as they got deeper into the society, like it was very interesting peeling back and seeing how different things functioned, how things were very dysfunctional. And I mean, obviously it was dysfunctional from the beginning, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think that's a lot of Hunger Games problem is people just look at it and they're like, oh, well, it's a 15, 16-year-old girl narrating it. Like, I can't relate to that, which is like, fine. You make a point, but I can't relate to the narrator of The Catcher in the Rye. And I still had to read that in high school. And I thought he was whiny as hell.
Yes. I was just talking about that book and how much I could not identify with it. I couldn't get behind it. I didn't like it. It was just this bratty teenage kid who played hooky, and that was basically it. That was the book. Yeah.
And it's challenging as I dive into a lot more like historical literature, and by historical I mean mid 20th century, getting into more of Ray Bradbury, Isaac Asimov, because so many of their stories are driven by men, and that's not inherently a bad thing. Of course, I'm still willing to read them. But I just read Something Wicked with This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury, which is a story about two 13-year-old boys and one of their fathers. And it was a good story, but so much of it relied on the relationship between these two boys at 13, as well as the relationship between the boy and his father. And there were just nuances there that I was reading this going like, I don't get this. I'm missing something here. And I think it's because it's
like an inside joke that you don't understand.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I was not a boy in the 1950s, so I can't relate to just running through the woods, doing whatever I want, whenever I want.
That's weird. But yeah.
So I think The Hunger Games gets a bad rap for that. But I think that when you compare it to other books like, The Catcher in the Rye or Ray Bradbury's novels, you start to see that it is pretty parallel with a lot of the voices of narration that we've seen throughout American literature.
I think that's what I was, I don't know, maybe gravitating towards the end of the first book and then launching into the second one. And going back to what you said about the older science fiction dystopian novels, that they do have a male voice generally, because that's who wrote the books. And generally at that point, that's who the readership was. I mean, it's kind of like parallel with it is right now that it's odd that the major readership, I'm assuming, must be a young female just due to the way that the genre is moving. But yeah, that's who read them. That's who wrote them back then. And I try not to fault them against that, because I mean, they couldn't tell the future and figure out that women would want to read something too. It's not their fault.
Want to read? Weird.
But at the same time, some of it is just, it's very telling of their time. Sometimes the way they treat people, and like right now, my husband and I were watching Foundation, and I'm like, I read this book, but I don't remember it being like this. I remember it being much, man, save the world kind of deal.
Yeah, the book that I forgot the name of earlier was On the Road.
Okay.
And I read that for the first time this year because everyone's like, oh, this is such an incredible piece of American literature, the great American road trip, just men traveling the country. And I read it and it was interesting, but there was not a single page that I could relate to because nobody like me could ever travel the country in the 1950s alone in a car with three other women, $5 between us crossing the Mexican border with no problem.
No, that sounds like a recipe for trouble in the
Yeah.
1950s.
And it was, it's a pretty easy read if you don't mind the stream of consciousness. Cause I mean, oh my
Mm-hmm.
God, there are just paragraphs that do not end. But there's also, when you look at the way they write about women, the way they talk about women in the book, the way women characters are treated, it is terrible. So you're
Mm-hmm.
reading this protagonist who comes off to me, no offense to anybody who likes On the Road, is very whiny, very self-involved, and very selfish because he finds these women, he discards them, his friend does the same, and they just basically hop from state to state, couch crashing and doing whatever they want.
That's awful. Well, I'm sure it was a great American novel, but
Yeah.
I agree. I don't think I would have anything to relate to. And then I probably end up stop reading it because I just like, nope, this is not for me. I need something that's going to make me feel good because that's why I read.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's why I gravitate towards, young adult novels again and again,
Mm-hmm.
because so many of them are written by women for women. And even if they're not, the next Pulitzer Prize winner, they're fun and they're generally pretty easy to read. And you can just sit down and escape for a couple hours and not have to worry about some pretentious highbrow allegory that you're missing between a father and his son.
That also might have been part of the problem with this is now just turned into like a discourse of the road. That also might have just been the problem that I feel like sometimes they try to take themselves too seriously.
Yes.
They try to hit that allegory too hard on the head instead of just letting it flow and let it just be like a conversation. They just, they're like repeatedly hitting a nail with a hammer, like just over and over again. I think they take themselves too seriously, trying too hard.
Yes.
But maybe that's a subgenre that I'm not aware of.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe it has to do with when a lot of those books were published, which was in the mid 20th century, when you really just had literary circles of very highly educated white men reading what very highly educated white men like to read and all going like, yes, this is good. Good job. Yes, I like this. Good job. And nobody else could really get into the circle to say, we want to read something else, please.
Mm-hmm. But then you had those wonderful people, Margaret Atwood and Ursula Le Guin, yes, who were doing their own stuff and writing amazing stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I read, I did not know until recently that The Giver by Lois Lowry was part of a series. It's part of
I don't think I knew that either.
Yeah, so it's part of a 4-book series.
Okay.
None of them are super long. They're all about the Giver length. And they don't really seem connected until you get to the last book and you realize she was creating this world of completely isolated cities, all with varying levels of access to technology. In the first book, you have Jonas and everything is like housed and fed and they have pills, medical access. But you get into these other books and they like live in like medieval England level poverty with like mud on their floor and thatched roofs and people dying because they broke their leg. And there's no like great overarching moral. She never comes together to say like, oh, this is what happened. This is how we got there. It's just a series of books of people living their life and trying to figure out how to navigate this world that they were placed into.
Interesting. And the end ties it together somehow?
Yeah. So in the end, you have a couple of the main characters from each of the books really coming together. They all end up in the same village. This village is supposed to be like a refuge from all of the evil for everybody who's freaked out or like ran away. So they come together and a couple people are like, oh, we're from the same village. And they're able to find some medium of closure.
Okay. Interesting. I had no idea. I just thought The Giver was what it was.
I did too.
I didn't know.
And the first book is about Jonas and you really don't come back to Jonas until the 4th book again. So it's very interesting because you're like, none of these are connected whatsoever. Why is this a series? And then you get to the last book and you're like, I see how they're connected, but this still offered me very little closure.
Interesting. I'm going to have to look these up now. Like I enjoyed The Giver. It wasn't It wasn't my favorite, but it was well done. I liked the twist. It was a good dystopian novel. Everything seems fine. You think you want to live there, and then wham, you're hit with like the seedy underbelly and how it actually functions and all the awful stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the books is told from the perspective of the woman who gave birth to the baby that Jonas steals away from the colony or whatever.
Really?
Yeah, so it starts to weave it together, but their paths don't really cross, which is why they have separate stories until the fourth book. So I just got into it this year because I was like, I like The Giver, I'll reread it. And then I used the story graph to track my books, and it told me that there were these 3 other books that came up after. Alrighty then.
What is it you're using to track your books?
I use a website called the Story Graph.
Okay.
So I've never heard of it. You can set like your reading challenge. You can track all your books, but they also, based on what you read, they analyze your genres, your authors, your lengths, your plots, and they start to make recommendations for you as well.
Ooh, that sounds interesting. Not that I need any more books to read, but that sounds interesting.
I like it a lot. I was using Goodreads, and then I moved over because I didn't realize that Goodreads is owned by Amazon. And I try to be very selective about the data that I give Amazon. And I was like, well, I didn't mean to unintentionally give you all the books that I like, so we're just going to go somewhere else.
Right.
Yeah, I try to avoid my own dystopian timelines by keeping all of the talking technology out of my house. If it talks, it can listen.
I'm pretty sure I just heard Margaret Atwood say those exact same words like an hour ago.
Really?
Yes.
I love that.
She was giving an interview about Oryx and Crate, her series about Oryx and Crate. And she was talking about the second book in that series, which I have already forgotten the title of, but talking about the God's Gardeners cult, who do not use technology. They recycle everything. And she said that they believe that if it's technology, if you can see it, it can see you.
Well, yeah, cameras.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. I think it's interesting when you're into this genre to look around at the amount of technology that we have right now, because 20, 30 years ago, this wasn't a possibility. And now you're like, there's cameras in my kitchen. There's something that listens to me and can order my groceries. My fridge can order groceries for me. Like, what is going on?
Right. And we don't think there's anything weird with that. We're totally fine. Well, most of us don't think there's anything weird with that. And everybody's fine about it.
Yeah, it's
convenient.
Yeah, like I welcome the robot revolution to drive my cars because there will be no more traffic. People will not be able to rear end me. It will be wonderful. But I don't necessarily want cameras in my house watching me and my fridge listening to me talk about what I do and don't want to eat and editing my grocery list accordingly.
There's a seedy underbelly. There's a novel for somebody. Just waiting to be written. Just set it, just take it, put it a little bit to the future, and then take it to the extreme. Like your fridge will start putting you on a diet.
Oh my, yes.
Forced diet.
Your fridge will be connected to your scale, which will be in your shower, and everything will conspire against you to keep you under 120 pounds.
And your fridge will do the grocery shopping for you, and it will be delivered. And suddenly you'll open it up and you'll be like, why is this all lettuce?
Drone delivery and drone putting it away.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. There's somebody's next novel. It's not mine, but it's somebody's.
It is the start of National Novel Writing Month. It's a great idea.
Yes. Listeners, you'll be listening to this in 2022. So do it in NaNoWriMo 2022.
Yeah.
But yes, we are recording this in November 2021. Oh, crap. It's November.
I know. It's the first day of November. This year is just flying right by.
I actually meant to do NaNoWriMo today to this month, and now I have to write like 5,000 words today. Holy crap, where am I going to fit that in?
I tried to do it last year. I was like, I'll give this a try, and it just did not work out at all. And all of October, I was like, I'm going to do it. And then I got like 3 new client projects. I'm like, just kidding. I don't have time.
Well, I tried to do it a couple of years ago and failed miserably. Like it was not a good fit for my life at the time. Like I started out strong and then just didn't finish. But this year I'm like, you know what? I am already writing a book. Why don't I just try to do 50,000 words in 1 month? And I'm doing the math. And it's like, if you're writing every weekday, which I take the weekends off to spend with my family, that's 5,000 words a day. That's a lot.
It is. I struggle some days to sit down and put down 1,000 words. I work a lot in short stories right now because it's most comfortable for me, because I can usually sit down with like a lightning bolt of inspiration and bang them out.
Right.
But sometimes those 1,500 words are like pulling teeth to sit down and have to hit 5,000 words every day. I mean, you just got to write on empty some days.
I know. Like, sometimes it evens out for me. Like, I have usually like a weekly goal. I like to have at least 3,500 by the end of the week.
Okay.
So that's a little easier, but sometimes like I try to do a daily goal of at least 1,000, just like try to do, something every day. And then I feel like I'm writing for hours and I look up and it's like, I have 400 words. Mostly because you keep writing the same pages and deleting it and writing it and deleting it because it doesn't sound right over and over again.
Yeah, just getting started, like staring at that blinking cursor. I'm like, all right, here we go. That's terrible. Let's do this again. Still terrible. Let's do this again.
Yep.
And it's so easy to get stuck there.
It is. And then the worst part is that you had a full 2 hour. Well, I'm going to give a personal example because this happened to me last week, but a full 2 hours of writing gave me 1,200 words. That was a terrible writing session. It was like the one of those over and over and over again ones. And then I'm reading, I'm like, this sucks. And I deleted the whole thing.
That's heartbreaking.
It is. But sometimes, it just needs to happen because
you got to get it out.
Yeah, it wasn't going anywhere. And I was just doing it to do it. And I should have stepped back and been like, okay, there's something wrong here. What's wrong? And then you start from a different angle.
Yeah, it's so challenging though, because the only thing you need to do to be a writer is to actually write, which is the hardest part of being a writer.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like I can see the story. Like I'm a plotter. I have my outline and my plot. Like that's what I'm doing. Like I'm editing the last rewriting and editing my first one, the last 25%. Actually, it might be like 10% at this point. I'm pretty close. In any case, and then I'm starting to outline my second one, and I do deep dives in plotting. Right? Do you do plotting or do you pantsing?
Oh,
combination.
I am such a plotter that I get like stuck in the plot. I have a novel idea that's been bouncing around in my head for years that I wanted to try to flesh out this month because I spend all my free time like working on the plot instead of actually working on the story itself.
Well, I actually kind of agree with that.
Okay,
like,
good.
I get really deep dive in the plot, and like I have to know everything. I have to be able to see every step. I have to know exactly what's coming next. But even if I know all of that, and then you get down to the actual act of writing, you're like, I know by the end of the chapter, the character has to have this happen. And sometimes just getting to that part.
Yeah, you're like, the bridge is not there and I don't know how to build it.
Or like I got stuck one day trying to get my character to walk through a door. Like I couldn't get a good way to him to walk through the door. Like it sounds ridiculous, but it's just like they kept having a conversation. It's like, no, you just need to go in the room. Stop having this conversation.
Yes, I've been a copywriter for going on 2 years, but I've been an aspiring writer for most of my life. And I always used the plot as a way to like circumvent actually writing, because if I was working on the plot, I'm still working on the story.
Right.
And it's to the point
where you do eventually need to start though.
Well, exactly. And that's why I think why I've started with short stories so recently is because it doesn't really matter where the short story ends. It can end anywhere. And some days I can sit down and I can bang out 10 pages of a short story. And I'm like, oh, the ghost of Ray Bradbury is with me today. And other days I get like 3 and I'm like, well, save, done, walk away. It's good enough.
Just be kind to yourself and take a breather.
Yeah, exactly. Just that act of showing up and just being willing to follow the story where it goes. Because I'll type things and surprise myself. But in the past, I was like, oh, I don't know what I did with that. And now I'm like, all right, well, let's just keep going then. I don't know. Somebody's leading the story. It's not me.
Interesting. I do something similar. I try to do like weekly, at least weekly. Sometimes I try to do daily, but I call them drabbles. Like, it's just like, I go to like Pinterest or Tumblr and pick out what are the writing, prompts.
Yeah.
And then try like a paragraph or two or a page or something, just said something fresh. It's kind of like, what's the thing you eat between meals to like refresh your palate?
Palate cleanser, snack?
Yeah, a palate cleanser, yes, but there's like a specific icy thing you eat. Anyways, but the daily drow was kind of like a palate cleanser for my brain.
Mm-hmm.
Like it just gives you something new to focus on before you move on to the actual project that you've been doggedly working at.
Yeah, exactly. It's just another way to hold yourself accountable and show up.
Mm-hmm. I've actually started streaming my writing days. And that is really good at making me accountable to make sure I'm getting that full amount.
Yeah.
Because I have a schedule set and I have to do it.
That's smart, because that accountability is tough. It's very easy to get lost in like the perfection of what a story should be and never actually get to the point where you're getting through that really ugly first draft and just getting it all out there so you can go back and refine again.
Right. Now, your short stories, are they just about anything, or are you writing them about the story you've been working on? Are they like a to get you into the story, or just anything?
Pretty much anything. I've tried a couple of them to like lead me into the story that I want to write. And then I just get so caught up on the details again of like what the world looks like. I think it's hard when there's been a story in you for so long. I mean, I've been thinking about this since before I went to college. So at least 10 years. And I think it's just at the point where I just need to yank it out of me and let it appear in whatever form it does. But I'm so protective of it looking the way I want the final iteration to look that I just struggle to let go. So showing up for the short stories and just reminding myself that like some days great things come out, other days it's just words, but we still showed up, we still typed, and we still followed the plot wherever it led.
You at least did something.
Yes. And for somebody who like shunned notebooks for years because I was like, my writing is too terrible to even see the light of day. Like, no, it's not. Calm down. Everyone has terrible first drafts.
Yes. All first drafts are awful.
Yes. And that's the beauty of them. I think that moving into being a copywriter has helped me a lot with that, because when it's client work, I don't have a choice. Like I have to show up and deliver something on the deadline. So sitting down with a blank Word document and a playlist with no words and just literally spitting up whatever comes out of me until I get to the point where I'm like, I'm done with all of the ideas that I have and I will work this into magic tomorrow.
Okay. We are actually hitting our hour mark. So we are going to have to say goodbye in a minute.
Well, thank you so much for having me on.
Yes.
This has been
I liked, I feel like it was stop and go, like, and then we just kind of like steamrolled into not talking about dystopian novels and just talking about anything else.
We had a really good dystopian novel talk. We talked about writing a lot too. The first day of November, it's only right. Even though that's not when this is coming out, it's still what's on our minds right now.
All right. Well, I had a wonderful time talking to you. You were a great guest. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I had so much fun.
Oh, yeah. You were so much more eloquent than I was sometimes. Like I was like, oh, my brain died. And you're like, yes, I'm just going to pick up with this topic and talk about it. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Once I remembered on the road, I really picked up some steam.
All right. Well, you have a great afternoon.
Thanks. You too.
Join me next time when I'm going to be talking to Christoph Nauer. Until then, keep reading, keep writing, and go do what you do best. You got this. Read and Write Podcast is edited and produced by Deborah Zebarth. Theme music was written and performed by Jay Hunger. Audio effects were created by Red Octopus and Black River Phonogram. Show notes and previous episodes can be found at readandwritepodcast.com. Special thanks to Jessica Reilly and all the subscribers who make this podcast possible.